I haven't met you yet. My name is Craig Jarvis. I'm the lead pastor here at Village Church East, and you are here on a good Sunday because this is our second Sunday in a new series that we've started called Red Lines. And if you need to catch up, the other good news is you can jump online and you can find out the track that we've gone so far as we work through this brand new series. I also want to let you know that after the message today, we're going to be doing, we're not doing communion, we're going to be doing our annual meeting. So we want to save some time to do that. If you're interested in finding out what our vision is for 2023, what we've been working on recently, and what our goals are as a church, it's a great time to stick around. Anyone can stay. You don't have to be a member in order to stay. So if you'd like to join us, we'd love for you to be a part of that as we do our annual meeting after the service this morning. All right, so my question for you this morning is a really simple one. What are you scared of? What makes you afraid? There's some popular phobias in the world today, and I thought this would be kind of fun to find out if we're all on the same page when it comes to what I'm a little scared of and maybe what you're a little scared of. So we're going to go through these and figure out maybe if we're on the same page, maybe we're not. And you're like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of phobias. Nothing scares you. Bring on anything. I'll take on the world. That could be you. That's fine. But for the rest of us, there's a few phobias. Here's some that you might be familiar with. Arachnophobia. Are you familiar with that one? That is the fear of spiders. Good. Yes, some are familiar with that one. How about aviophobia? What do you think that is? Planes. Very good. Yeah. Fear of flying. How about elevatophobia? What does that sound like? Fear of elevators. That's right. That's right. So don't visit the World Trade Centers when they were, the big places if you're afraid of elevators, because that's a lot of walking. How about this? Autophobia. I thought it would be cars. It's the fear of being left alone. Autophobia, which kind of makes sense. Autophobia. Things I'm afraid of. I want to be just really honest with you this morning. So things that I'm afraid of. I always have a fear of heights. Do you know what that's called, by the way? Acrophobia. Acrophobia is a little afraid of heights, particularly when it comes to driving across long bridges. Now, I didn't used to be this way, but I've got this little fear about driving across long bridges. Isn't that weird? There's actually a name for this, so I'm not like the only person in the world who goes through this. It's pronounced Jeffreyophobia. Jeffreyophobia. So if you're like me, then you are a Jeffreyophobiac, all right? Afraid of people called Jeff. Afraid of going across the bridge. How about, but I am kind of pleased with myself because I remind myself of Indiana Jones a little bit. I'm a little scared of spiders. Why did it happen? It's snakes. A little scared of snakes. He was never a fan. Do you know what that's called, by the way? Ophidiophobia. Scared of snakes. Now, this other one, interestingly enough, I do find myself, as I get older, this one becomes a thing for me. And I'm actually amazed at how much it becomes a thing for me the more the years go on. I am scared to death of closed spaces. Do you know what that's called? Claustrophobia, yeah. I would rather get a massive head injury and have a doctor guess as what's wrong with me than go into an MRI. I cannot stand those machines. I feel vulnerable with you this morning, so I feel like I can tell you that, but I've got a few things wrong with me apparently. Let me ask you this question. What scares you when it comes to your walk with Jesus Christ? Do you have any fear? There might be a few things that you fear when it comes to what Jesus might ask of you. So if Jesus were to ask something from you or to put you in a situation, what situation would you get into that would say, okay, Jesus, now you're asking a little bit too much from me? In my walk with Jesus, for instance, what if I lost somebody I really loved? That would be very hard. And it might be a fear that causes you to say, Jesus, you can ask this much of you, but not this much. There's a line that I am just not sure I'm able to cross. I wonder what Jesus would ask from us that would cause us fear. We're talking about red lines, and red lines are the personal boundaries through which we've decided not to cross, whether in our personal lives or in our professional lives or our lives with Jesus Christ. It's the fastest, furthest, or highest point of degree that we consider to be safe. I'll go this far, but beyond that, I'm going to be unsafe. What lies beyond the red line is unknown. And so what lies beyond there for our hearts creates an idea of danger or risk or discomfort or loss. That's the big one. What will I lose if I decide to follow Jesus Christ over this red line? What keeps us from going over the red line? And I would say the main thing that keeps us from going over the red line in our relationship with Jesus Christ, Jesus, you can ask this much of me, but not that much of me, is one four-letter word that starts with an F, and that is fear. Jesus, I'll follow you anywhere as long as it's not there. There's a crowd that was walking with Jesus in John chapter 12. They were following him constantly. He had gathered quite a following. Interestingly enough, John, the Gospel of John, the majority part of John is about the last week of Jesus' life. I don't know if you know that. But the first 12 chapters of John are basically the time that Jesus is gathering this following. And a lot of people have decided to follow him. Once in a while, Jesus would separate people from the crowd and talk to them individually, challenge them just mano a mano, one-on-one. Zacchaeus was one that he challenged in John chapter 3, you remember? And Zacchaeus was fearful because there was a red line for him. So he came to Jesus at what time of the day, church? You remember? He came to Jesus by night. He came to Jesus by night because he was a little afraid of what would happen if his colleagues see him with Jesus Christ. And Jesus had that amazing John 3 conversation with Zacchaeus at nighttime because Zacchaeus was afraid, rich young ruler. Remember the rich young ruler came to Jesus and said, you know, I basically got it all, and I'd like to go to heaven too, so what can you promise me? What do I have to do in order to do that? And Jesus looked at him and he said, dude, you've got a red line. And that red line is your stuff. So here's the deal. Sell all your stuff and come and follow me. Red line for him. And he went away very sad because he was fearful of who he would be without his stuff. Peter was talked to by Jesus Christ. Peter was constantly saying to Jesus, you know these other 11 losers? Well, there's one thing that makes us different. I'll never deny you. I'll stick with you through thick and thin. I'll go with you wherever you go, even to the point of death. And Jesus said to him, Peter, I got to tell you, there's a red line coming up for you. You're going to deny me not once, but 3 times. And that's going to break you. The thing you fear the most, being the weak link among my disciples, you're it. And then all these people heard him say, take up your cross and follow me. In other words, be willing to lose it all in order to follow me. For some, they jumped all in. Mary, last week, we saw Mary, she broke this most incredible vial of perfume and washed his feet with it. She gave up, and Lazarus and Martha were just going, yeah, go. And nobody was complaining except for the rest of the people in the house. The rest of the people in the house were going, hey, that doesn't look right at all. You know, that's a risque thing that you're doing there, Mary. And Mary didn't care. She was pouring out her love, her devotion for Jesus Christ, and she didn't care what people thought. Crossed a red line. But others had a problem with it. Jesus had a tendency to pull people out of the crowd and challenge them with their personal red lines. Here's the deal. Many in the crowds followed Jesus, but many were fans and not true followers. They thought they were. But when Jesus pulled them aside and said, okay, you personally have a red line. You've got to be willing to cross that. You got to be willing to give that up. You got to be willing to face the danger. You got to be willing to face the loss. You got to be willing to cross the red line. And when you cross the red line, you got to know there's really incredible stuff on the other side, but unless you cross it, there's only a limit as to what our relationship is going to be like. John chapter 12, Jesus is becoming an enemy of the powerful people. If you wanted to attach your name to Jesus, you're taking a risk. People in John chapter 12, by the time we get to John chapter 12, there's a group of people that want Jesus dead. Jesus has just raised Lazarus from the dead. That's a problem. And so this group of people decide that Jesus needs to go away. The reason they want to make Jesus go away is fear. They fear losing what they are already owning. Each group had their own fear of what they would risk. Some feared prestige among the others who held their future in their hands, like the politicians. Maybe they'll think less of me. Maybe society will think less of me. Some feared the power that they would lose if they decided to follow Jesus. This is why Nicodemus came to Jesus by night. He was a powerful leader among the people. He was one of the leading Pharisees. And yet he came to Jesus by night because he was afraid of losing his power. Some were feared losing possessions. Do you like that? Prestige, power, possessions. Some were afraid of losing their possessions. Apparently, they had no trouble requiring Zacchaeus. When Zacchaeus came to know Jesus, you remember that? Climbed up in a tree, he was in the crowd, trying to hide in the crowd, but he was short. So he needed to get some height. So he climbed up in the tree. He did not have Geophobia. So he climbed up in the tree, and he's looking out, and he sees Jesus, and Jesus sees him, and Jesus says, I'm going to have dinner at your house. Pulls him out of the crowd. They go into the house, and we don't know what they talk about. All we know is that afterwards, this short little thief, tax collector, and all tax collectors in Jesus' day, let me make that clear, were thieves. Not the IRS today, maybe. But in Jesus' day, they were thieves. They were stealing from their own people and giving to Rome, and they could make up whatever they wanted as the benefits to themselves for collecting taxes for Rome. Zacchaeus was a thief. Jesus said, I'm going to have... In fact, when Jesus said, I'm going to have dinner at your house, Zacchaeus, you know what the rest of the town said? He's gone to have dinner with that sinner. Did you know that? They knew Zacchaeus' name, but they called him a sinner because that's how he was known in the town. Jesus has dinner with the sinner. And afterwards, we don't know what the conversation was. Zacchaeus comes out and he gives back 4 times to each person what he had taken. It's amazing when that red line is addressed by Jesus Christ and you're willing to cross it, the kind of person that awaits you on the other side. Regular people, just trying to get by. But the fear of following Jesus, whether they had power or they didn't have power, whether they were just trying to get by, their fear of following Jesus would lump them in with crazy people like Mary, who pours expensive perfume over feet. By the way, do you know what the disciples were feeling the day Jesus rose from the dead? That's Easter for us. When we get together on Easter, what is the feeling that we have together when we're together celebrating Easter? How would you describe that? You could say, what would you describe? What? Joy, happiness, celebration. Do you know what the disciples were feeling the day Jesus rose from the dead? Fear. I'll show you in John 20, verse 19. On the evening of the day, the first day of the week, the doors, and they knew the ladies had just come and said, he's not here. They knew the body was gone. On the evening of the day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for what church? They locked the door for fear of the Jews. Jesus came and stood among them and said, Jesus has such a great sense of surprise. Jesus goes, peace be with you. Shalom Aleichem. That's literally what he says. Shalom Aleichem in Hebrew. Fear is a powerful force that drives people to do very strange things. Psychology Today put in this little, I was reading up on fear, and I like this little clip, so I put it up here for you. In addition to its deceptions, fear also manipulates our perception, distorting the objective truth of things. And in doing so, it throws fantastic images before our eyes and otherwise twists our understanding of who we are and what the world is all about. Jesus became an enemy of the powerful, and fear filled the hearts of those who hated him and those who followed him. Don't you find that interesting? John 11, verse 45. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs." This is literally right after he raised Lazarus from the dead. "If we let him go on like this, if we let him go on untethered, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Do you see the fear in the verses? Do you see it? The leaders of the people were scared to death of Jesus, not because he raised somebody from the dead, but because they would lose their place of power if he continued doing these incredible miracles. What did they fear? They feared losing their power. And by the way, who was afraid? The most powerful people in Israel. The people with the most power have the most fear. Listen, you work all your life to get power, prestige, respect, and if that's what you value, that's what Jesus is going to challenge. These guys could follow Jesus just like anybody else. Nicodemus was welcomed to Jesus with open arms. But they wouldn't cross the red line because they knew if they did, they would attach their names to Jesus. That's dangerous, and they would risk losing their power. Religious leaders were afraid. You should know this. Rome ruled everything it conquered. They owned the world. But in Israel, they did something a little different. They allowed leaders to stay in place that they considered their puppets. So you read about Herod. Herod was a Jew, traitor, but a Jewish traitor. He worked for Rome. Rome decided in this particular case with Israel, they would leave people with power and they would pay tribute to Rome. They'd keep them under their thumb. Do you know why they did that, by the way? Pilate was completely ticked off with this, by the way. This is why he washed his hands. He's going, "You people are insane. Do what you want to do." Because Pilate didn't have complete power. Pilate, without these crazy leaders, Jewish leaders around, Pilate would have just said, "Here's what we're going to do. Sit down and stop talking." Pilate washed his hands because these people had as much power as he did. They were playing a power game in Israel that they played nowhere else in the world. And the reason was these Jewish people had a tendency to constantly revolt. The Maccabean Revolution took place about 160 years before Jesus showed up on the scene. It was a terrible time, and Rome said, "We're not doing that again. So give them some power, but keep them under wraps." That's where the Pharisees and the Sadducees, Herod, the Tetrarch, that's where all of these things come into play. Because these people had power a little bit, and they didn't want to lose it. This is why they said in verse 48, "If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Once you have position among the crowd, that's a hard thing to risk. And you do amazingly weird things. You want to know how weird this got? Verse 9 of chapter 12. "When the large crowd of the Jews heard that Jesus was there, they came, not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead." After Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, he takes him with him all over the place. They go to the grocery store, Lazarus is there. They go to the tabernacle, Lazarus is there. They go to this place to have dinner, Lazarus is there. This ticked the people off who were in power because they couldn't argue against a dead guy walking around. Verse 10, "So the chief priests made plans," get this, "to put Lazarus to death as well." This is twice for Lazarus. Lazarus was already dead. They wanted to kill him again because on account of him, look at this, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. This is what crazy does. Fear will make you do crazy things. If you knew a guy could raise somebody from the dead, would you not go to him and say, please raise my loved one too? Wouldn't that be obvious? If he has the ability to raise people from the dead, I got a list of people I'd like him to help me with, don't you? Not these guys. These guys don't want his help. They want him dead. I want him dead. I want his family dead. I want his house burned to the ground. You know what that's from? Sorry. Untouchables, that's right. They weren't just happy killing Jesus. They want to kill Lazarus as well. Fear will blind you to reasonable thinking. I would think you'd want to get on Jesus' good side. Get him to start doing some favors for you. Not these guys. And you can see it easily in the following verse, verse 17. The crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to bear witness. The reason why the crowd wanted to meet with him was that they heard he had done this sign. The crowds are growing. So the Pharisees said to one another, now see the fear here. You can see we are gaining nothing. Look, the whole world has gone after him. Can you identify the fear in these verses? You can almost smell it. They saw the signs and they didn't care. They just wanted their power back. And fear led them to do some pretty dumb things. Verse 37, though he had done so many signs before them, they still did not believe in him. The crowd followed at a distance, and the leaders who feared Jesus used fear with the people. It's a great way for politicians to get your vote, by the way. You know that, right? If they can create a fear in you, it's one of the most easy emotions to manipulate. If I can get you to fear something, I can get you to do some pretty crazy things. Leaders pulled the crowds back into submission by utilizing their emotion of fear. Crowds were curious, but in the end, despite how many miracles Jesus did, Jesus knew that in order to break through, it wasn't going to be on a crowd basis. It's going to be pulling people out of the crowd and saying, listen, if you want to follow me, identify that red line, let's cross it. Fear dictated the direction of so many people. In chapter 9 of John, where Jesus healed a blind man, the blind man's parents were addressed by the Pharisees, by the religious leaders of the day. And they said, confess, your son is in sin, and he's talking to a sinner. He probably wasn't even blind this whole time. He was playing a game his whole life. He was pretending to bump into things. And we were all convinced, just so at this time, he could meet up with this guy Jesus and make us look stupid. Verse 22, the blind man's parents said this, they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Now, for us, that doesn't say a whole lot, so let me explain what that is. You are ostracized from society. You weren't allowed to go to church. Nobody would shop at your bodega. Nobody was going to come over to your house for parties anymore. No worship, no forgiveness. You weren't allowed to go to the high priest and ask for forgiveness of sins. Nobody would sacrifice for you. The priests would ostracize you. You would have no way to be right with God. If you were put out of the synagogue, you were ostracized and there was no way for you to have a relationship with God. And society would think that you were the biggest sinner of all. I want to tell you, these people that wanted to follow Jesus but couldn't get across the red line because of prestige or power or position, these people were stuck. They were just stuck. They were in the synagogue. They were making money. Their names were in society. They didn't want to be the brunt of everybody's joke. They wanted people to respect them. They wanted to come to church. They wanted to worship. They belonged. They didn't want to lose that. But if they followed Jesus, they risked all of it. They were stuck. They could have went to Jesus Christ. Sure, he would have taken them. He would have forgiven them. He would have befriended them like Mary, Martha, and Zacchaeus and Lazarus and all these folks. But instead, their fear of what they would lose, their fear of their comfortability of being stuck, drew a red line where they feared what was on the other side. They could have seen amazing. Can you imagine hanging with Jesus for a day? That'd be pretty cool, right? You get to see some pretty cool things. I mean, he's cursing fig trees and they're wilting like in a second, and he's feeding 5,000. He's walking on the water. He's calming the oceans and the seas. He's doing some pretty. You could be a part of that crowd, but only a few decided they wanted to. Does that ever make you wonder why? I think most people were stuck in their life roles. They wanted enough Jesus to entertain them, but not to dictate what they needed to do with their lives. If they did believe in Jesus to the point of crossing every red line of safety in their lives, who would they become? That was an unsafe space. They were happy in their stuck position. I don't know about you, but Christmas for me is, I enjoy it, but we're traveling here and we're visiting these people here, and I wake up in a weird bed here. I don't know what day it is. Do you go there? People ask me, they say, is it Wednesday or Thursday? I go, I don't know. I don't know what day it is. I love Christmas vacation, but I look forward to getting back because then my life becomes ordered again, right? I like the stuckness. These folks would not follow Jesus Christ because they like being stuck. They didn't like the uncertainty of what was on the other side. They liked the magic show. They liked the healings. They're like people that come to church. They like the music. They like the fellowship. They like the church setting. They feel good when they're here. But that's all they want. Nothing beyond that. They just want to be comfortable in a place where there are blankets around them and they don't have to stretch. This is what we call shallow belief. Did you know not all belief is saving belief? Some people believe in Jesus, but they're not going to heaven. Did you know that? Did you know that demons know that Jesus rose from the dead, but they're not going to heaven? The demons believe and tremble. There are some people that know all about Jesus Christ, but they've never crossed their red lines. They've never got unstuck. Their belief is not a saving belief. They're interested, but the world and the cares of the world and their stuckness choke out their belief. Belief that perseveres and is a belief that will save. It goes over red lines constantly. Jesus is after a belief that is willing to be unsafe, uncomfortable, stretching, dangerous, changing, life-changing. Look, you can see it in verse 42. It's just full in this John 12 passage. Nevertheless, many even of the authorities believed in him. See that? The authorities believed in him. These ones that were afraid of losing their power believed in him. But for fear of the Pharisees, they did not what, church? They wouldn't confess that belief so that they would not be put out of the synagogue. And here's the bottom line why. For they loved the glory that comes from men more than the glory that comes from God. Isn't that the saddest verse you've ever read? But do you know you live among people that follow that verse to a T? Sure, I believe in Jesus, but I'm not going over that red line because then I'll become a Bible thumper and people will think, woo-hoo-hoo, we can't be friends anymore. I'm happy in my position. I'm stuck in a good place. These folks were following Jesus, but they were stuck. They love the glory that comes from people more than the glory. They don't want to change the status quo. Many people came to Jesus and John, but many people had an asterisk after their belief. John 6:64. Jesus knew this, and he told his disciples a long time before this. There are some of you, he told his disciples, who do not believe. And then in the following verse, in John 6:66. Note John 6:66. Because it's one of the worst verses in Scripture. After this, many of the disciples, that's Jesus' disciples, turned back and no longer walked with him. They liked the show, but they didn't like this constant barrage of crossing red lines. Listen, if you were one of the people in Jesus' day and you saw a bunch of people around Jesus, you would describe them as, oh yeah, those people are followers of Jesus. But that verse just said a lot of these people that would typically be described as followers of Jesus literally stopped following Jesus. They were fans, but not followers. There's another red line why the crowd wouldn't cross, and it's back in John 7 and verse 12. And there was much muttering about him among the people. While some said, he's a good man, others said, no, he's just leading the people astray. And here you have it in verse 13. Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of him, because not only were they stuck and happy being stuck, but they were safe. On this side of the red line, safe. I know what to expect. I know what to think about. I know what others expect of me. But crossing that red line, that was uncertain. And fear kept the crowds from breaking away to follow Jesus because they were safe. Do you ever notice how people feel safe in a crowd? If anything COVID taught me, it's that if a crowd organizes, people run to the crowd. You can put whatever label you want on that crowd, but people run to the crowd. They hide in the crowd because they are safe in the crowd. But when they get away from the crowd and on their own, that's when they have to be unsafe. I think today people feel a lot more safe in a crowd rather than stepping out on their own. Judas did. Judas hid among 11 other people. And then Jesus pulled him out and he said, you are the one that's going to betray me. I think Judas betrayed Jesus because Jesus asked him to go across a red line he put in his mind that he decided he wouldn't go over. Judas saw all the same stuff Peter did. He saw all the same stuff John did. He saw all the same stuff all these disciples did. Why didn't Judas follow Jesus? It's because Judas' red line would not be crossed. The evidence of true belief, church, is that you're crossing red lines, you're bearing fruit fearlessly for Jesus Christ. I'm not looking for safety. I'm driven to make much of Jesus Christ. That's the difference. I realize that on the other side of this line in my mind or in my heart, it is better than on this side. I don't care about power, prestige, possessions, positions of honor. It doesn't matter because when Jesus asks something of me, I know I am safer on that side than I am on this side. And I'm willing to unstuck myself and go. Like Mary, you've stopped caring about your own safety. Her reputation was... Everybody mocked her in the room. If you missed that, it's last week. She didn't care. She knew that what she was gaining was far more than what she was giving up. This is why Jesus said, whoever loses his life for my sake will what, church? Will find it. I don't want to be safe any longer. I don't want to be stuck any longer. Do you know what I want? I want to be strong. And if I cross that red line, there's a strength that will be injected into my life better than anything any muscle-bearing guy would ever inject in. There is a juice that is injected into my life when I cross that red line, when I become something that I could never dream I could be. Without exception, every individual who personally believes in John was truly saved. They are marked by two things: a clear profession of faith, and number two, their salvation is evidenced by a change of a willingness to lose big for Jesus Christ. When you read through this book, the crowds follow Jesus. There's a lot of fans, but there's few followers. And when Jesus pulls one person out of the crowd and says, let's talk about your red line, and they cross that red line, they make such an amazing difference for the world and for Jesus Christ. And the only reason we talk about them today is because they crossed that personal red line. They didn't want to be safe. They didn't want to be stuck. They wanted to be strong. And Jesus pulls them across. I can give you names from the book of John, left and right. John the Baptist, Andrew, Peter, John, Philip, Nathaniel. All of these guys stepped out of their comfort zone and made a difference for Jesus Christ. Nicodemus believes, defends Jesus, and Nicodemus ends up with Joseph of Arimathea gathering together Jesus' body and burying him. Did you know that? We don't hear a lot about Nicodemus after John chapter 3, this Pharisee that came out of fear to Jesus by night, but something happened in him. He crossed that red line. He actually spoke out for Jesus Christ later in the book, but the next time we hear about him, he's at Jesus' cross, taking his body down and gently honoring Jesus' body by putting him in the tomb. The blind man confesses and worships. Martha confesses and believes. Mary believes, worships, and pours out her wealth. Thomas believes, confesses, repents. Peter confesses his love for Jesus. Even in John chapter 21, where Jesus says to Peter, you are going to be taken by your enemies someday. You are going to be stretched out on the ground, and they are going to do merciless things to you. They are going to kill you for following me. And Peter said, I'll do it. Tradition says that Peter was crucified upside down because he didn't consider it to be honoring. He didn't consider himself to be worthy of crucifixion like Jesus, so he has to be crucified upside down, but that was only after the Romans nailed him to the cross and then made him watch as they killed his entire family. These people walk up to this red line and they cross it, and their names go down in history because they realize what Jesus himself said to the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Verse 10, for the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. I'm not afraid of red lines anymore. For when I am weak, church, would you say it with me? For when I am weak, there's a strength that awaits you on the other side of that red line. Fear will keep you on this side, but you'll be amazed at what God holds for you on the other. Safety is why everybody stays. Stuck, we prefer that. We call it the rut. It's a comfortable place to be. Jesus says, nah, take a chance. Believe me. And the great thing is, he's already on the other side. He doesn't push us, he pulls us over to be with himself. So my question to you, church, is this: are you safe, stuck, or strong in your faith? Safe, comfortable where you are, stuck, haven't made a move out of uncertainty or fear, or strong, ready to move, wait for the little pull of Jesus over the red line. Joshua 1:9 is one of my favorite verses. You probably know this. Joshua stands up in front of his people, Israelites, as they move into their new promised land, and he says, have I not commanded you be, church, what it is? Be strong and courageous. Don't be frightened. Don't be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. The crowd is always fickle, always interested to a point. Don't be a part of the crowd. Jesus is interested in changing you individually. Individual choices is where God does his best work. So where is God asking you to cross the red line in your faith? Do you need to be Maybe you need to accept him as your Savior straight up. Maybe you've never made that a major, maybe you've never told somebody else, I am a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm done playing games. I am crossing the red line. I am identifying with Jesus Christ. Break the vial, pour it over his feet. Who cares what anyone thinks? I belong to Jesus. Maybe that's you. Maybe you just need to make and you know what, a great way to do that? Get baptized. That is your moment to make that public profession of your private decision to follow Jesus. Maybe that's your red line. Maybe you need to be baptized. We got a baptism coming up in a couple of weeks. You can get in on that. Maybe you need to start giving to the church. Maybe this hasn't been a regular for you, and maybe you like what East does. You like what this church is doing. You're going to hear more about it in a few minutes, and you want to be a part of that. Maybe that needs to be a red line. Cross that red line, step over in faith, and start giving faithfully every single week. Maybe it's surrendering a habit. Maybe there's something in your life that you're hanging on to, and you're not sure if you can live without it. It's kind of identity for you now. It's your go-to place. You're not happy with it, but you don't want to give it up. Trust that Jesus is on the other side of that red line, and maybe you need to surrender that habit so that you can see what kind of a person lies on the other side. Be strong, be courageous. Find somebody that you can talk to. Find an accountability partner. Somebody that loves you and loves the Lord. And tell them, listen, I need you to hold me accountable. I'm tired of this thing ruling my life. It makes me feel safe. I'm stuck, but I'm tired of it, and I want to cross that red line. Help me. You'd be amazed how many people in this church would do backflips if you asked them for help. Cross the red lines. Be bold. Be courageous. Don't get stuck. Don't stay safe. Be strong and full of courage. And number 2, when it comes to faith, fear is a tool of the devil. Why do you think Jesus was always saying, fear? Oh, you know those verses. Because he said it all the time. Because he knows fear is a tool of the devil. It's like Jesus comes up to you and says, hi, how are you doing? Fear not. Okay, all right. Wouldn't you love that? Wouldn't you love for somebody to just constantly say, you don't need to fear, don't fear. I'm here to tell you, church, fear not. Fear is a tool of the devil to keep you on this side. Fear keeps you safe. Fear keeps you secure. Fear keeps you stuck. We fear losing power, prestige, possessions. Here's the bottom line. Church, what are you afraid of losing when it comes to following Jesus Christ? Let me remind you of the way the Bible speaks about faith. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Jesus says, if you have faith to move mountains, they will move. Do you get the idea? Jesus is trying to communicate something to us. Your faith is greater than the devil's fear. If you ask anything, Jesus says, in my name, I will do it. Don't you love that? I mentioned earlier, wouldn't it be great to hang around with Jesus just so you could get him to do you a couple of favors every now and then? My garden is like not growing this year. I don't know what's wrong with it. I've thrown like all kinds of stuff into it. It's Illinois soil. Maybe that's it. I don't know, but it's just not growing. Jesus, can you do something? And sure, tomatoes. Wouldn't that be great? People don't walk around with Jesus and ask him for favors. They were scared of him. I find that just shocking. Jesus says, if you ask anything in my name, I will do it. The fact of the matter is, and this is the greatest thing I'm going to say to you this morning. If you're willing to cross that red line, he goes with you. He doesn't leave you alone. You know, it's like that, okay, I'll do it. When you cross the red line, you're never alone. Joshua 1:9, you remember these words? Have I not commanded you? Joshua reminds us, be strong and courageous. Don't be frightened. And don't be dismayed. Read this last chunk. For the Lord, your God, is with you wherever you go. Do you know how the Great Commission ends? Go into all the world. Have fun. It's like me going out the door to go to work, and my mom would always say, remember, Craig, it's what you make it. And I would go, oh, I hate going to work. And then she would say, get on the bus, go to work. She didn't come with me. I had to go on my own. But you know how the Great Commission ends? Go. Teach, baptize in my name, teaching them to observe everything I have commanded you. Do you know the last verse of the Great Commission? And lo, I am with you until the end of until the world blows up. Till the end of the age. You have the promise from Jesus that if you're willing to go across the red line, he's waiting on the other side. He doesn't push you across and say, good luck. Have fun storming the castle. He's on the other side of the red line, and he pulls you over and introduces you to a brand new strength of faith that you never thought possible. We're going to have our annual meeting in about 2 seconds. And I'm going to be challenging us a little bit more about crossing red lines. I'm praying that in 2023, God uses Village Church East like never before. Would you pray with me, please? Father God, I'm grateful that we had this opportunity to talk through the dangers of fear and how it keeps us in a false sense of safety and security and stuckness. But I'm grateful, Father, that you promised to give us a strength on the other side of that red line, deeper than we ever thought possible. May you create in us not just a hunger to cross red lines, but a desire to do it on a regular basis so that our faith can deepen and we can make a difference. May we fear nothing when it comes to our relationship with you. And that simply means that we absolutely trust you fully. So do what you will with our lives. We pour out all of our idols, all of our valuables, all of the things we love in this life. We pour them out and we give them to you because we trust you. And we believe that whatever's on the other side of these self-imposed red lines is better than we are now, where we are now. I pray that you would burn this into our hearts and our minds. In Jesus' name, amen.
Would you stand with us, church?